Volume 3, Chapter 5 of the Vicar of Wrexhill. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. The Vicar of Wrexhill by Francis Milton Trollope. Volume 3, Chapter 5. The Vicar at Home. Spring succeeded to winter, and summer to spring, without producing any important change at Cartwright Park. Charles Mowbray requested and obtained permission to continue his studies without interruption, and for 5 months Helen and Rosalind lived upon his letters, which, spite of all his efforts to prevent it, showed a spirit so utterly depressed as to render them both miserable. They seemed both of them to be converted into parts of that stately and sumptuous machine which Mr. Cartwright had constructed around him, and of which he was himself the mainspring. The number of servants was greatly increased. The equipages were much more splendid, and from an establishment remarkably simple and unostentatious for the income of its owners, the park became one of the most magnificent in the country. Among the periodical hospitalities with which the vicar, for Mr. Cartwright was still the Vicar of Wrexhill, among his periodical hospitalities was a weekly morning party, which opened by prayers read by his curate, and ended by a blessing pronounced by himself. At about 2 o'clock, a déjeuner à la fourchette was laid in the dining room, around which were discussed all the serious and serio-political and serio-literary subjects of the day. On this occasion, the selection of company, though always pious, was not so aristocratical as at the pompous dinners occasionally given at the Park. But what was lost to vanity on one side by the unconspicuous rank of some of the guests, was gained to it on the other by the profound veneration for their host expressed in every word and in every look. Not only Mr. Corbold the lawyer, who was indeed in some sort ennobled by his relationship to the great man himself, but the new curate, and the new apothecary, and even the new schoolmaster were admitted. The company were always received by Mr. Cartwright and his lady in the drawing room, where all the family were expected, that is, commanded, on pain of very heavy displeasure, to assemble round them. The tables were covered with Bibles, tracts, evangelical magazines, sanctified drawings, and missionary begging machines. Hardly could Chivers, who was becoming an example to all serious butlers in voice, in look, and in step, produce a more delightful sensation on his master's organs by announcing "my lord this," or "my lady that," than that master received from watching the reverential bow of the sycophants who hung upon his patronage. A sort of frozen blandishment on these occasions smoothed his proud face as he stood, with his lady beside him, to receive them. The tall, obsequious curate, who hardly dared to say his soul was his own, though he freely took upon himself to pronounce the destiny of other people's, bent before him, lower than mortal ever need bend to mortal, and he was rewarded for it by being permitted to aspire to the hand of the only daughter of Mr. Cartwright of Cartwright Park. The little round apothecary, who by evangelical aid withal had pushed out his predecessor as effectually as ever pellet did pellet in a pop gun, sighed, whined, bought tracts, expounded them, kneeled down, though almost too fat to get up again, and would have done aught else that to a canting doctor's art belongs, so that it were not physically impossible, for one sole object, which for some months past had hardly quitted his thoughts by day or by night. This lofty object of ambition and of hope was the attending the lady of Mr. Cartwright, of Cartwright Park, at her approaching accouchement. The new schoolmaster, who was already making hundreds where his unprofessing predecessor made tens of pounds, was a huge gaunt man, who had already buried 3 wives, and who had besides, as he hoped and believed, the advantage of being childless, for he had always made it a custom to quarrel early with his sons and daughters, and send them to seek their fortune where they could find it. This prosperous gentleman actually and bona fide fell in love with Miss Torrington, and having very tolerably good reasons for believing that there were few things at Cartwright Park which might not be won by slavish obedience and canting hypocrisy, he failed not to divide the hours during which he was weekly permitted an entree there, between ogling the young lady and worshipping the master of the mansion. Poor Rosalind had found means, after her dreadful scene with Mowbray, secretly to convey a note to Sir Gilbert, informing him that she no longer wished to change her guardian, as her doing so would not, she feared, enable her to free Helen from her thraldom. She was still, therefore, Mrs. Cartwright's ward, and the vicar had not yet quite abandoned the hope that his talented son might obtain her and her fortune. But hitherto Mr. Jacob had declined making proposals, avowing that he did not think he was sufficiently advanced in the fair lady's good graces to be quite sure of success. So, as no avowed claim had been hitherto made to her hand, the schoolmaster went on ogling every Wednesday morning, and dreaming every Wednesday night, unchecked by any, for the fair object of his passion was perfectly unconscious of having inspired it. Mrs. Simpson, of course, never failed to embellish these morning meetings with her presence when she happened to be in the country; but she had lately left it for the purpose, as it was understood, of making a visit of a month or two to a distant friend, during which she had intended to place her charming little Mimima at a boarding school in a neighbouring town. But Mr. Cartwright so greatly admired that sweet child's early piety, that he recommended his lady to invite her to pass the period of her mamma's absence at Cartwright Park. Then there were the Richards family, who, for various reasons, were among the most constant Wednesday visitors. Mrs. Richards came to see Rosalind, little Mary to whisper good counsel to her friend Fanny, and the two elder sisters to meet all the serious young men that the pompous vicar could collect round him from every village or town in the vicinity. Besides these, there were many others, too numerous indeed to be permitted a place in these pages, who came from far and near to pray and to gossip, to eat and to drink at Cartwright Park. It happened at one of these meetings, about the middle of the month of June, when the beauty of the weather had brought together rather a larger party than usual, that a subject of great interest to the majority of the company was brought under discussion by Mr. Cartwright. No sooner had Mr. Samuel Hetherington, his curate, finished his prayer, and such of the company risen from their knees as chose to come early enough to take part in that portion of the morning's arrangements, that the vicar opened the subject. "My dear friends and neighbours," he said, "I have to communicate what I am sure will give you all pleasure, for are we not a society united in the Lord? Notwithstanding the little difference of station that may perhaps exist among us, have we not all one common object in view? It is for the furtherance of this divine object that I have now to mention to you a circumstance at which my soul and the soul of Mrs. Cartwright rejoice, and at which I am fully persuaded that your souls will rejoice likewise." This preface produced a moment of lively interest throughout the whole room, and there was hardly a person present who did not eagerly undertake to answer for the sympathy of his or her soul with those of the vicar and his lady. "Since we had the pleasure of seeing you last," resumed the vicar, "I have received a despatch from the secretary of the South Central African Bible Association, by which I learn that it is in contemplation to send out to Fababo a remarkably serious young Jew, recently converted as missionary and minister plenipotentiary to all spiritual affairs relative to the church about to be established for Fababo and its dependencies. But, as you all well know, that such glorious enterprises as this cannot be undertaken without funding, and it has been requested of me in the despatch to which I have alluded, that I should exert such little influence as I have among you, my dear friends and neighbours, for the collecting a sum in aid of it. Our good Mrs. Simpson's sweet little cherub Mimima is furnished with a box, which she will carry round as soon as the collation is ended, to petition your generous contributions." A murmur of approbation, admiration, and almost of adoration, burst from the whole company, and the conversation immediately turned upon the conversion of Jews, and the happiness of having found so very desirable a mission for Mr. Isaacs. While the enthusiasm was at its height, Mrs. Cartwright, having previously received a hint from her husband, proposed that a serious fancy fair should be held on that day month, on the lawn before the drawing-room windows of Cartwright Park, for assisting the outfit of Mr. Isaacs. "If all the ladies present," continued Mrs. Cartwright, "and such of their friends as they can prevail upon to join them, will only occupy themselves during the ensuing months in the making of pin-cushions, the composition of tracts, the sketching of some dozens of apostles' heads, together with a few thousand allumettes and pen-wipers, we should, I have no doubt, collect a sum not only very serviceable to the exemplary Mr. Isaacs, but highly honourable to ourselves." "Delightful!" cried several ladies at once. "There is nothing," said the little girlish wife of a neighbouring curate, "that I dote upon like a fancy fair. A serious fancy fair, of course I mean, my dear," she added, colouring, as she caught the eye of her alarmed young husband fixed upon her. "A serious fancy fair for such an object," observed Mr. Cartwright, "is indeed a charming spectacle. If the Lord favours us by granting a fine day, the whole of the ceremonies, I mean including the opening prayers, the exposition of some chapters bearing upon the subject, the reading a tract which I will direct my curate to compose for the occasion, and the final blessing, all this, I think, if the weather prove favourable, should be performed out of doors, as well as the sale of the ladies' works. This, I question not, will produce a very imposing effect, and will, I think, be likely to bring many persons who, by a blessing upon our labours, may be induced to purchase. The elderly ladies will of course sell the articles, and the younger ones, whose piety will lead them to attend, may conceal themselves as much as possible from the public eye, by walking about in my groves and shrubberies, which shall be open for the occasion. It will be desirable, I imagine, to get handbills printed, to invite the attendance of the whole neighbourhood. Do you not think this will be advisable? I am sure that no one can avoid everything like general display and ostentatious more cautiously than I do, but I conceive this public announcement, on the present occasion, absolutely necessary to the profitable success of our endeavours." "Absolutely," was the word caught by echo for the reply. "Have the goodness, Mr. Hetherington, to sit down at that small table. You will there find all things needful for writing, and indite the handbill that will be necessary for us. There is a warmth of feeling at this blessed moment generated among us toward this holy work, which it would be a sin to neglect. Let it not, like those good feelings and resolutions of which we have been told by the preacher, pass away from us to pave the courts of hell, and be trodden under the feet of the scorners who inhabit there. No, my brethren, let it rather rise like a sweet savour of incense, to tell that not in vain do we pronounce his name on earth." Before these words were all spoken, the assiduous curate was already seated, pen in hand, as nearly as possible in the attitude of Domenichino's St. John, and looking up at Mr. Cartwright for inspiration. In truth, the vicar, though the dignity of a secretary was in some sort necessary to his happiness, would by no means have entrusted the sketching out of this document to any hand but his own. He felt it to be probable that it might become a matter of history, and as such it demanded his best attention. While Mr. Hetherington therefore sat with his pen between his fingers, like a charged gun, waiting for the pressure of the finger that should discharge it, Mr. Cartwright, with the ready hand of a master, produced the following outline in pencil: "Cartwright Park, on Wednesday, the 12th of July, 1834, will be held a serious fancy fair on the lawn of the Reverend Mr. Cartwright's mansion at Cartwright Park, for the promotion of an object most precious in the eyes of all professing Christians, namely, the fitting out a mission to Fababo, of which the Reverend Isaac Isaacs is to be the head and chief, to him being entrusted the first formation of an organized Christian establishment for Fababo and its dependencies, together with the regulation of all adult and infant schools therein, and the superintendence of all the Bible societies throughout the district. Large funds being required for this very promising and useful mission, the ladies and gentlemen in the neighbourhood of Cartwright Park are religiously requested to attend the serious fancy fair hereby announced, both as contributors and purchasers, whereby they will ensure the especial favour of Providence to themselves, and the blessings of religious and civil freedom, and the purest evangelical instruction to unnumbered thousands yet unborn of the natives of Fababo. Nota bene, collations will be served at 3 o'clock in 5 of the principal saloons of Mr. Cartwright's mansion. Prayers to be announced at 1. Blessing from the Reverend Mr. Cartwright himself at 5. The whole of the religious ceremonies to be performed in the open air." This sketch, as the inspired author called it, having been read aloud and approved by acclamation, was delivered to the curate to copy, and as soon as this was completed, Mr. Cartwright received it from him, and holding it aloft in his right hand, pronounced aloud, in a very solemn and impressive manner, these words: "May this service, dedicated to the Lord, be found acceptable in his sight, and bring forth honour and glory to us and to him in the world to come, and the life everlasting. Amen." This business happily completed, the religious amusements of the morning continued to go on as usual. Mr. Bateman, the enamoured schoolmaster, constantly sitting, standing, and moving, with his eyes fixed on Miss Torrington, and the despairing Corbold, whose 6 passionate proposals had been 6 times formally refused by Helen, reposing himself on a sofa in deep meditation on the ways and means by which he might so wheedle or work himself into the secrets of his magnificent cousin, as to make it necessary for him to wink at any means by which he could get Helen into his power, and so oblige her to marry him. At length the elegant banquet drew the company from their tracts and their talk to the dinner parlours, and iced champagne refreshed the spirits of all, but particularly of those exhausted by the zealous warmth with which they had discussed the sinful adherence to good works so frightfully prevalent among the unregenerated clergy of the Church of England and Ireland. This was a theme upon which the majority of company at the Cartwright Park meetings never wearied. At length the final blessing was pronounced, the party separated, and the tired family left to repose themselves as they best liked till the hour of dinner. The increasing delicacy of Miss Cartwright's health, and Rosalind's drooping spirits, had prevented the intimacy between them from gaining ground so rapidly as they had, perhaps, both expected, when the families of the Park and Vicarage became blended into one. Yet it was evident that Rosalind was the only person to whom the pale Henrietta ever wished to speak, and equally so that Rosalind always listened to her with interest. They were mounting the stairs together, after the company were dispersed, when Henrietta said, "Are you not wearied to death by all this, Miss Torrington? Oh, how you are changed since the time I told you that I had pleasure in looking at your face! It was then the brightest looking countenance I ever gazed upon; but now, to use the words of I know not whom, all the sunshine is out of you." "It is a sorry compliment you pay me, my dear Henrietta; but I believe I am not quite the same sort of person I was then." Tears started in her eyes as she spoke. "I have overheard painful comparisons, Miss Torrington, between times past and present, and I am sorry for it. I really would not willingly add to the sorrow and suffering my race has brought upon you. Do not go and sit by yourself and weep till you are sick, as I have done many's the time and oft. Let us take a very slow ramble into that very thickest part of the Reverend Mr. Cartwright's shrubbery, where the sun never enters. Shall we? We are quite fine enough for such godly people, without any more dressing for dinner. So we can sit in the shade till the last bell rings." "I should like nothing so well," replied Rosalind; and hastily skirting the sunny lawns, they took their stations on a seat which the morning sun visited as if on purpose to prevent its being dark and damp, but which for the rest of the 24 hours remained almost as cool as if there were no such globe in the heavens. "We are growing very seriously gay, Rosalind, are we not?" said Henrietta in a lighter tone than she usually indulged in. "Fancy fairs used to be the exclusive property of the worldlings, but it seems that we are now to come in for a share of their fraudulent charity and their vain benevolence. Not a bad pun, that, Rosalind, if I had but intended to make one. But do tell me if you do not think Mr. Cartwright has magnificent taste?" "Very, for a person who professes himself so given to the contemplation of things above the world. But to tell you the truth, Henrietta, I am much less surprised at the vainglorious manner in which he displays his newly acquired riches, than at the continuance of his saintly professions. I expected that the Vicarage of Wrexhill would have been resigned, and all the world peaceably permitted to be just as wicked as they liked, without Mr. Cartwright of Cartwright Park giving himself the least trouble concerning it. You little know the nature of the clique to which he belongs. That they value pleasure fully as much as other men is quite certain. That they struggle for riches with anxiety as acute, and hold it with a grasp as tight as any human beings can do, it were equally impossible to doubt. But that power is dearer to them than either, is a truth well known to all who have sat within the conventicle and watched its professors, as I have done." "But how can a man so addicted to self-indulgence, as it is evident Mr. Cartwright is, endure the sort of trouble which the charge of a living must inevitably bring with it, especially in the style so universally practised, I believe, by all serious ministers, that of interfering with the affairs of every individual in their parish?" "It is that interference that makes the labour a joy. But you are not initiated, and cannot comprehend it. You do not, I am sure, conceive the delight of feeling that not a man or woman, not a boy or girl in the parish, either do, or leave undone, any single act of labour or of relaxation, without thinking whether Mr. Cartwright would approve it. And then the dependence of so many on him for their daily bread, the curate, the clerk, the sexton, the beadle, and the schoolmaster, and the schoolmaster's assistant, and the apothecary, and the attorney, and the undertaker, and dozens of poor dependent simpletons besides, who, if like poor Seymour's organ grinder, they knew the wally of peace and quiet, would run away to batten on the first moor they came to, rather than endure the slavery of living dependent upon the favour of a fanatical divine. Whatever it may be to them, however, depend upon it, that to him, and the like of him, this petty power, this minute tyranny of interference, is dearer than the bread of life, and that, much as Mr. Cartwright loves his fair lady and all that belongs to her, he would think that all still dearly purchased, were he thereby to lose the right of entering every house in the parish, and unblushingly to ask them what they have done, are doing, and are about to do." The conversation then rambled on to all things connected with the fancy fair and its object, till they had talked themselves tired; and then they sat silently watching the beautiful checker work of light and shade which fell on the grass carpet before them, till the languid Henrietta, resting her head against a tree, fell fast asleep. Rosalind sat beside her for some minutes, but growing weary of the extreme stillness necessary to guard her slumbers, she quietly withdrew herself, and wandered on under the trees. Having left the sleeper for about half an hour, she turned to walk gently back again; but fancying, as she approached the spot, that she heard the sound of a man's voice, she slanted off by another path, which took her close behind the seat occupied by Miss Cartwright, though a thick, trimly cut laurel hedge rendered it impossible for any one to see or be seen from the other. The hedge, though a good one, had not, however, the same effect on sound as on sight, and Rosalind was not a little startled, as her soft footfall silently drew near the seat, to hear a very passionate declaration of love in the drawling voice of Mr. Hetherington. She stopped, by no means from any wish to hear more, but greatly embarrassed lest, her step being heard, she might appear to have stolen to this obscure spot for the express purpose of being a listener. "Make me the happiest of men, adored Miss Cartwright," reiterated the young man. "Your father has permitted my addresses. Then do you not, most charming Henrietta, refuse to listen to them?" "It would not be for your happiness, sir," replied the deep low voice of Henrietta, "that I should do so." "Let me be the judge of that. Oh, if such a fear be all that parts us, we shall not, lovely Miss Cartwright, be long asunder," replied the ardent Mr. Hetherington. "I know myself, sir," said Henrietta, "far better than you can know me; and though we have not been long acquainted, your situation as curate of the parish enables me to know your sentiments and opinions better than you can know mine. I hear you preach twice every Sunday, Mr. Hetherington, and I do assure you there is not a single question of importance on which we think alike." "Name them, sweet Henrietta! Generously tell me wherein we differ, and trust me that it shall be the study of my life to bring my opinions into conformity with yours." "I heard you, in the middle of your sermon last Sunday, stop short to scold a little boy who had accidentally made a noise by letting his hat fall on the ground. You said to him, 'Before next Sunday you may be brought into this church in your coffin.' I saw the little fellow turn pale, yet you repeated the words. I really should not like to marry any one who could so terrify little boys, for he might perhaps think it right to terrify me also." "Never, oh never again will I so offend you! And for yourself, beloved Miss Cartwright, what could I say to you but words of hope and joy?" "Neither your joy nor your hope, Mr. Hetherington, would do me much good, I am afraid. In one word, much as it will surprise you to hear it from my father's daughter, I am not evangelical, sir." "It is but a reason the more for my wishing to call you mine. If my opinions are unsound, you shall correct them." "I wish you would be persuaded, Mr. Hetherington, to desist from this suit. I know that if my father has permitted it, I may find it become very troublesome to me, unless you have yourself the generosity to withdraw it, for my father does not brook contradiction." "Ask any proof of my obedience but this, and you shall find me a slave, having no will but that of my charming mistress. But to resign you, while I enjoy the inestimable privilege of your illustrious father's sanction, it is impossible." "Then, sir," said Henrietta, in an altered voice that betokened strong emotion, "if nothing less will save me from this persecution, I will disclose to you the great secret of my life. Make of it what use you will. I am an atheist." "Surely you cannot suppose, my beloved Miss Cartwright, that this confession can produce any effect upon my love, unless indeed it be to augment it. What noble frankness! What confiding trust! Believe me, there can be no difference of opinion between us on any subject sufficiently strong to conquer the tender and powerful passion you have inspired. Yield then to the soft violence which I know will be sanctioned by your respected father. Let me thus—" "Leave me, wretch!" exclaimed Henrietta in a voice that made Rosalind tremble. "He may lock me up and half starve me, for he has done it before to make me obey his will, and I have obeyed it, and hated myself for my cowardice. But I will not marry you, Mr. Hetherington, even should he treat me worse than he has yet done, which would not be easy. Go, sir, go. I am an atheist, but horrible as that sounds even to my own ears, it is better than to be what you have proved yourself." Rosalind, hardly less agitated than Henrietta appeared to be, stood trembling from head to foot in her retreat, till aware that the unscrupulous Mr. Hetherington had retreated in one direction, and the unhappy Henrietta returned to the house by another. CHAPTER VI.